Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching KTN Prime, and we are bringing you live wall-to-wall coverage of the happening today as far as the by-elections ongoing in different constituencies across the country are concerned. My name is Leangari, and I want us to go back to our discussion earlier on. I have with me political analyst Dismas Mukua and, of course, Stella Agara, who is a governance analyst. I could just see the reactions when the stories and the live links to our reporters were ongoing. There were reactions on issues on journalists being barred from access. Of course, issues of chaos being reported, the response from the IEBC and the police. One of our reporters telling us their journalists were barred from covering some of these happenings, and this particular place being in Mbeere North. And guess what? The journalist says that nothing has been done. No comment from the IEBC, no comment from the police officers. Stella, what do you make of that?
First of all, I'm just glad that I'm being vindicated on my judgment about IEBC. And I'm glad that I'm being vindicated, but I'm very unhappy that this is the reality of our country after holding this number of elections that we have held. This commission has found people who have handled elections before, so I don't understand why some of these mistakes are happening. The second one for me has got to do with the question you asked about politicization of the police and security agencies. And I think you may have heard Kaluma saying that he was attacked while the police were watching and they did nothing about it. Remember that ODM is in the broad-based government, and he has been one of the most vocal supporters of the broad-based government. What is happening? You see, when I say that the government needs to provide protection for every actor in an election, this is exactly what I mean. How is he getting attacked? And I don't like it when you start saying just because he's an honorable member, but anybody being attacked and the police are watching, what are they saying about that election? For me, the biggest failure in this particular by-elections is the CS for Interior, Kipchumba Murkomen. And the question I'm asking today is how many mistakes does he need to carry out in the ministries that he's in for the president to note that he keeps on giving this gentleman jobs that he cannot handle? That's number one. Number two has got to do with something I was saying just before we went for the break. I mentioned a friend of mine who vied for MCA, and in her campaigns, one of the things she was told by a sitting member of parliament, she was told, the problem with this is that you're not going to win this election because you have not shown your capacity for violence. I said it in the last time we were in this studio, that men have normalized violence, and they have the capacity for it, and they have the means for it. And so it makes it very difficult for vulnerable groups like people with disability to engage in this kind of an election. Even though our laws are progressive and they create space for these groups of people to participate, when you start observing the kind of activities that we have seen in the polling stations, you now start worrying about the safety of those groups, even if they decide to take advantage of the laws and the policies that allow them to participate. The last thing I will say, and this for me, is the indictment on IEBC. And I'll start with a post that has been made by a gentleman, I think he's calling himself son of Laikipia on X. He's saying IEBC, when they are when they hear reports about the violence happening in our elections, and he had a picture of a gentleman who's been given food and is not looking at the plate. So he's basically suggesting that IEBC is ignoring all the complaints they're hearing about this election. As far as they're concerned, the only thing they're supposed to be doing is tallying and announcing results. For me, one of the problems that we have with that kind of a scenario is that every player begins to believe that they are on their own. The reason why we have government, the reason why we have systems is to ensure that we do not have a situation where it's survival for the fittest and the fattest. The moment you allow people to start thinking, I have to protect myself, the result is men moving around with guns, politicians guarding spaces with guns. It is citizens getting to the gates of a polling station and stopping journalists from coming in. There are police in that polling station, and they did not even intervene to ensure that certified journalists get into the polling station and record. The question I'm asking myself, is it the state itself that did not want those journalists in there so that we don't get the story? Or is it that citizens have ceased to trust everyone, including the journalists? What are we therefore saying about governance in this country?
Dismas, your thoughts about what's happening in Mbeere North?
Well, she's raised many issues. Let's start from the reason for voter apathy. You know, during a general election in Kenya, voting becomes a public holiday, so people do not go and cast the ballots. But during these by-elections, I guess people are waking up early in the morning to go and look for their unga. So if you have no capacity, you don't have anything in your granary, I doubt whether you're going to spend hours on end in a queue, and then in the evening you go and sleep on an empty stomach. So maybe that is one of the reasons. And then the second reason, which Stella again has raised, makes the IG be in a very complicated space. Because if the IG has got intelligence reports that you are likely to have violence in a particular constituency or a particular ward, then he deploys security officers, is accused of, engaging in voter suppression. There are the Mamamboga who has never come across an armored personnel carrier or who has never seen an AK-47 or seen the law enforcement officers in their, their camouflage uniforms on site. This lady may decide to go back at home and, have a cup of uji and watch things from a distance. Now, if the IG has got those reports, then it's only fair for him to deploy security, because if he doesn't, and then these elements of political violence, again, Stella will come and say this political violence is actually targeting women. But also, even men suffer from political violence, as you've seen the case with Kaluma. However, again, it's the case. There are a number of political actors actually design political violence as a tool to suppress people, especially when they're coming from the competition. So if you know that in a particular corner, that is where your competition is, you make sure that there's a bit of disturbance. People wake up in the morning, they say, things are thick, we are not going to cast our ballots. That is number one. Then number two, it's very easy to throw stones at IBC, especially today, because you can imagine that the number of concerns or issues raised against IBC rather, they're in truckloads. And it may not be possible to do the investigations within the hour or within the day. But what one must suggest is that after this election, because by default setting, the buck stops with IBC. The IBC must do a special audit of these elections and find out what they can actually learn. Because nobody is going to blame the law enforcement officers for citizens stopping journalists from accessing a polling station or even a tallying center. People will ask, where is IBC? So what IBC must do after this election is do a special audit and find out who else they can include in the ecosystem. So that from A to Z, it's very seamless. You must get the law enforcement officers, you must get civil society, religious leaders, everybody. But more important than anything else is to ensure that you punish these architects of political violence. Because if you don't do that, then some of the sharpest tools in the shed will have no time for elections in 2027. Because why would you want to run for electoral office if a goon, well paid with muscles, can land a rock on your head? Why would you want
to question, as we continue talking about Mbeere North constituency, there has been a feeling that there was an over-deployment of police officers, but yet we are seeing reports of journalists being barred from accessing to cover some of the events at the tallying center. I mean, it begs the question, why are the police officers there? And they're on high deployment. Is it to protect the citizens, to ensure there's common peace and order? Why are they there?
I mean, the primary responsibility is to ensure that there is law and order, that anybody who wants to go and cast their ballots, to exercise their agency, they do it in a peaceful manner without intimidation. Now, it's not practically possible to have, police blanket, everything else, because again, if you do that, there'll be a policeman every 50 meters. So therefore, it means that nobody's going to cast their ballots. However, if the law enforcement officers identify those citizens who are stopping the journalists from going to cast their ballots, they can be used as examples. Like, for instance, the people who gave Kaluma a beating, I suspect they CCTV. So one would expect that tomorrow or latest Monday, there would be people looking at a magistrate and answering to charges. But if you don't do that, it will be a best practice. If the fellas who stopped journalists from accessing a tallying center or a polling station, if nothing is done, then people will say during the next elections, because we can now afford to engage in mischief without the journalists, it's going to be a best practice. It's going to be something that everybody wants to do, which is why, while IBC has been blamed for everything, but they need to offer leadership in this space, because if they don't do, especially after these elections, then the voter turnout in 2027 would even be lower than 20%.
Leah, I think, first of all, we need to caution Mokua against being insincere in this conversation. You know, nobody goes into a campaign and nobody vies so that they can be an example for the next election. Majority of people, even if Mukoa himself decides to vie, one of the things he's intending to do is to either win that election or ensure that he secures enough votes to convince the voters the next election for him to win. Now, when election offenses happen, and the recourse is to wait until the election is over to get some form of matters addressed, it basically means anybody can misbehave before the election, because at the end of the day, their misbehavior will still earn for them the result they're looking for, and then their opponent will have to wait until after the election to hear the report about those the election offenses. I think we really have to be cautious about even what we claim in this space. That's number one. Number two, the IBC never works on elections alone. I have been a part of working with IBC, and at the time I was influencing IBC as part of a youth advisory board. One of the things that the IBC constantly does is to engage the other agencies that are supposed to be doing clearance for elections. I've mentioned this in the studio before. They work with the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties to verify things such as, for example, whether you've had claims about Wamudende being a voter or not a voter in the constituency is vying in. Those kinds of things are not something that a party verifies. Those kinds of things are things that it's between the IBC and the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties to determine if this person is vying under DCP. Is he a member of DCP or not? Those kinds of things. They work with our education agencies to verify that if you produce a certificate of education that is required for your position, then it is a valid certificate and that you're cleared. They work with the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission to ensure that if you have any matters that border along Chapter 6 of our Constitution on leadership and integrity, or matters of cohesion, and you have been seen inciting or doing all those kinds of things, that these things will eventually be brought before the IEBC as considerations before you're cleared to vie in Kenya. The IEBC never works alone. The other groups that they work with is all security agencies. And when I say all, I mean they sit with the police, they sit with the military, they also sit with the National Security Council in preparation of an election. And I know, and I want to believe, that they have not decided that this is a small mini by-election, and therefore they don't need to sit to these agencies to get some form of consolidated efforts in how they're going to secure the result that comes out of the election. IBC is supposed to be independent. That's why their name has the word independent. And so as they're engaging, they can't afford to come into this conversation thinking that we are going to ignore this report because maybe this one is just crying foul and he's the one who organized violence against himself. Because IBC's interest should be to protect the image of the election, the results from the election, and to ensure that everything is not just fair and just, but it is seen to be fair and just. The moment they fail on that assignment, you cannot again make a decision of saying that the IBC, there's too much demand on the IBC. At the end of the day, that is what we're paying them to do. Number one.
To just question, as we come to a close to this of this conversation, I know you've mentioned extensively about the IEBC and their conduct and the police officers and the different stakeholders that they work with to ensure an election is credible and fair. Looking at what has happened today, what do you project for the 2027 general election? Can the IEBC be trusted, and are we ready to even have an election come 2027? And these are your closing remarks. You can just tell me what you think about that.
Let's start with Stella, so that I've got the rights of refusal.
I doubt you'll get rights of refusal, because the Bible says you shall know them by their fruits. If this is what we are seeing, we know what to expect in 2027. That's number one. They cannot afford, and this is a plea, this is not even accusation, declaration, this is a plea to IBC. They cannot afford to go into the national plebiscite with this kind of conduct. They really must step up their game. Number two, as a nation, not the IBC, not the police, as a nation, we must make a decision that will have zero tolerance towards violence in our elections. Surely our democracy has come a long way, and I've seen a number of citizens complaining about the fact that we have been here, we have been working on this, we can't still be having violence as part of our campaigns and as part of our votings. We had a small problem of counting. Surely we should maintain ourselves in working on the business of counting and not go back to the place where we used to be with violence. As a nation, we must make a decision that will have zero tolerance for violence. The last thing I will say on this matter is that we must now make a decision that we are going to be engaging in election elections on issues and not on trivialities and the strength of an individual, money-wise or violence-wise. Because the more violence happens, I doubt if there's anybody who can tell me what the candidates in Kasipul are about as far as their manifestos are concerned, what the candidates in Malava are about as far as their manifestos are concerned, because we have been treated to the violence for so long and the noise, we miss the main issue, why citizens are supposed to be coming out to vote.
Yeah,
For me, to 2 points only. Politicians must know that impunity is not a sustainable strategy. These organisms getting goons is not a sustainable strategy for winning an election. If you want to win an election in Kenya, there are two ways. Present sexy ideas, people may like them, or present your personality. But under the elections we're having today, it's all about personalities. As Estelle has said passionately, all these candidates who are running, they've not presented any new ideas that you may say, this is Eureka, we are going to elect him because of these ideas. It's around personalities. And then also Kenyans must start placing a premium. And we have said this times above number, character, capacity, and competence. Because if you elect thugs, if you elect goons to the National Assembly, first of all, they don't understand what the budget-making process is. They don't interact with policies. They don't do anything. So that even when you get, you remember what we were talking about the other day, that the National Land Commission is making some funny decisions where you are going to have the national and county elites taking land meant for marginalized people. If you're going to elect goons to the National Assembly and Senate, if you're going to elect people on their capacity of hurling rocks to the National Assembly, as soon as they go to the National Assembly and they realize that the National Land Commission can be manipulated, then these guys will go and get all the land. When they get to the National Assembly, the first thing they ask is, how do we make money in this house? You remember President Ruto has indicated that some of the MPs are given money to engage in conversations. Yesterday there was a report, I think, released by Oxfam, which spoke to the fact that you have a few billionaires in town, about 125 who control all the resources. Can you imagine if such a billionaire lands at the National Assembly and gives everybody 10,000 bob, the kind of policy these people
and that
can make?
calls for the Kenyans to now start taking action and making sure that whoever they elect into these positions is someone who can adequately represent their voices and their interests.
Character.
We'll have to come
Character.
to the end
of
our conversation tonight.
Actually, in my view, would rather elect someone who has character, but has no competence nor capacity. Because, you can leave that person with your baby and your baby is safe.
All right, so leaders that we can trust, we can hold to accountability, and who can also deliver to the needs of the Kenyans. Thank you so much for making time. Dismas Mukua, political analyst. Stella Agara, thank you so much for making time. Stella Agara is a governance analyst. This has been KTN Prime, of course, bringing you updates, live updates on what is happening across the country during the by-elections. And of course, we have different reporters who are stationed across the country. We have Daniel Karaoke, who is in Ugunja, Jeff Kirui, who is in Malava, and of course Bramwell Bwire in Kasipul, and Clement Masombo in Bere North, and they are there stationed to bring you updates, wall-to-wall coverage of what is happening. Of course, last we spoke to our reporters, the response was vote tallying is ongoing, and perhaps by midnight also we'll be able to know some of the winners, and that's just a projection from some of our reporters. Coming up next is Jesse Rogers. I'm thinking about one of our reporters, but it's Jesse Rogers coming up next to continue giving us, to bring you live updates on what is happening across the country as far as the by-elections is concerned. My name is Leangare, and earlier on my sign language interpreter was Pretty Janet. Always a pleasure to have you join us, and we hope to keep you updated as the night goes. And of course, remember, tomorrow we still keep it we keep an eye on the by-elections to tell you exactly what is happening, of course, hoping that the election results will have come out for most of those constituencies, if not all, and of course, Baringo County. Thank you for watching. Always a pleasure to have you join us. Keep it KTN and don't go away.
Behind every headline is a heartbeat.